It's been 30 long years, but there finally is a Beverly Hills Cop 4. This one's on Netflix and it's called Beverly Hills Cop Axel F. It's directed by first time director Mark Malloy, and almost everyone has returned, all of the OG cast. This one kind of picks up right where we left off only 30 years later. It is the continuing adventures of Axel Foley. This time he has a daughter and he finds himself caught up in another mystery in Beverly Hills involving corrupt cops and drugs and Kevin Bacon and a whole bunch of stuff. The Beverly Hills Cop franchise is one of my favorite buddy cop franchises. I grew up watching this thing. Rewatching it now, I realize I probably watched it when I was far too young to be watching such things because I didn't realize how much casual nudity and gratuitous cursing there was. I think it's something that just flew over my head as a kid. God knows we were watching it on pirated VHS at the time because that's all the access we had. But Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2, I think, are comedy classics. Beverly Hills Cop 3 leaves a lot to be desired, but watching it in hindsight, it was directed by John Landis, mind you. Like the John Landis, Animal House, Blues Brothers, Three Amigos, John Landis. And watching it in hindsight, there are still some really fine moments of comic timing that comes at the hands of a director like that. So despite it being a shitty film and a little misguided, I think there are still some interesting things in Beverly Hills Cop 3. I know it's taken them a very long time to get this off the ground. They seem to have finally convinced everyone involved to come back, even Jerry Bruckheimer, who sat out Beverly Hills Cop 3 because of creative issues and I think budgetary issues at the time. That said, this one feels like a disappointment.
This one feels like it was better off left in the script stage. I know it's a first-time director and I don't want to shit on anybody's dreams. And look, it's not his fault. This just feels like a movie that is absolutely 25 years at least too late.
It feels like the kind of thing that Netflix picks up because they think there is IP value and nostalgia value, while all the other studios in Hollywood had already rejected it.
But also it feels like the kind of thing Netflix would pick up because nobody else wanted it, right? This is that 90s show. This is Fuller House. You know, it's the why the fuck are you doing this now?
I don't think it's a terrible film. God knows I've seen worse reboots or even worse movies on Netflix. That Jessica Alba movie that came out last week, Trigger Warning or whatever it's called, is a steaming pile of dog shit. And that is the lowest dregs of the Netflix action efforts. Beverly Hills Cop Axel F is passable. It just feels incredibly disappointing for something that is 3 decades in the making. And a lot of it has to do with not being able to capture the same kind of, I hate using the word magic, but that's what those first 2 movies felt like.
Yeah.
Like it was really cashing in on Eddie Murphy as a person, as a comedian, as a character, and also trying to fold him into the idea of the buddy cop movie.
But the problem with this one is that it doesn't feel like Eddie Murphy wants to do this either. I think more than anything, it's an insult to the Beverly Hills Cop title, right? Because it doesn't do any of the things that make Beverly Hills Cop 1 or 2 those films. There are no, well, I wouldn't say no. There are significantly less Eddie Murphy moments in this. They really tried to just maybe focus in on the story, which I guess in a lot of ways is a mistake. It's not fun. It's not funny. Nobody looks like they're having fun.
But it's trying to be fun and it's trying to be funny.
The big problem here is that they're trying to cash in on the nostalgia, right? It's the, oh, look, you really, really loved Beverly Hills Cop. In fact, if you haven't seen it, we have it on Netflix. So here's the 4th iteration of that. But don't worry that it's not so good because you loved the first 2.
Exactly. I think that is the logic that Netflix is counting on. They're hoping that it's just going to be something you click because you recognize that face and you recognize that title. Meanwhile, so little has actually been put into making this what it once was. And I
Yes.
say that because we had just come out of watching Bad Boys Ride or Die. And when you look at something like Bad Boys for Life or Bad Boys Ride or Die, which wasn't made by Michael Bay, and it was essentially a film that was picked up
Mm.
a decade later and then continued by someone else, you realize how much attention was paid into maintaining that vibe and keeping that same mood and tone.
Yeah.
And it really makes you appreciate what Adil and Bilal had done.
Yeah.
Because when I'm watching Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, I'm just like, you're not going the whole hog. Like, you're not pulling the trigger. You're just dipping your feet in the water, but not jumping in. And it's with everything, right? It's with Eddie Murphy's moments. It's with the theme song. It's with all of these nostalgia grabs that they keep going for, but then just stop short of it.
It really feels like a bad Russian carbon copy of what a Beverly Hills Cop movie is. Do you remember back in the day when you would get these sort of bootleg B versions of action movies? And this feels exactly like that because they got the lead actor who is trying to act like the lead actor of that other show, but not going full hog. Eddie Murphy has come out to say that he has retired the trademark laugh, so he doesn't do that here. They never actually play the theme song, the most recognizable thing about Beverly Hills Cop in this thing.
It's constantly in the background, but a muted version.
They never really play it. They get an orchestra version of the first four notes before they wind off into something else.
I think that was what I found most frustrating about the film. Like, that was what made me the angriest as I was watching this, because first of all, the name of the theme song is in your fucking title. So play it. Just don't be shy about it. Don't
Yeah.
be ashamed about it. It is the most recognizable, most iconic thing, other than Eddie Murphy, about this franchise. So just play the goddamn song.
Why are you pretending it doesn't exist? We know it does. In fact, this shouldn't be one of those cases where you're holding back the theme song because you don't want to overuse it or because you're trying to save it for a moment. In those first three films, that song was every fucking where. Anytime he gets into a car, they play that song. That is the song to take you from daylight to nighttime. They use it constantly. In fact, I dare say they overuse it in the early versions, right? And here they just ignore it. And I think all of that wrapped up into Eddie Murphy's apparent reluctance to be in this thing, to be Axel Foley all over again. This really feels like a wet blanket.
We were both rewatching Beverly Hills Cop 1, 2, and 3 before watching this. And it's a really interesting experience because I don't think they can make those sorts of movies in 2024. Like, a studio wouldn't greenlight such a thing, in that it's a very loosey-goosey film. The entire thing works because it's anchored around Eddie Murphy's personality and Eddie Murphy's character and Eddie Murphy's laugh, right?
Yeah.
All of that kind of plays into this role that he has created or that they have created for him and this character. But the character itself is a serious policeman. It is a slapstick comedy at moments, but for the most part, he is doing real police work and he's a damn good cop. And so
Yeah.
there is a certain darkness to the themes of the show, despite it being incredibly funny. Pulling something like that off is very, very difficult. Martin Brest did it really well in the first one. And then, of course, Tony Scott knocked it out of the park in the second one. John Landis, yeah, there were some issues with the script and all of that stuff, but I think a lot of that had to do with the studio just wanting to cash in and make a third movie. But for the most part, there was a general tone and a loosey-goosiness that actually worked. This movie tries hard to recreate that sense of loosey-goosiness, but then feels the need to anchor it in some kind of serious pathos that doesn't really go anywhere. And that, for me, was the biggest problem with this movie. There is a subplot involving Axel Foley and his estranged daughter, and it pulls you out of the film. It brings the movie to a screeching fucking halt. every time. Like, it's so boring whenever they're on screen together and bickering and talking about their past and their relationship. It is utterly pointless that it takes away from all of the other good stuff that's happening. Like, Joseph Gordon-Levitt is in this and he's pretty good. Kevin Bacon is this and criminally underused. Like, all of the OG cast are back and we just don't get enough of them. Instead, we are saddled with this stupid father daughter story that goes nowhere. And even at the end of the movie, the resolution is so predictable and boring and ho hum that it feels utterly meaningless.
I will say the one surprising thing about the resolutions in Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2 is how quickly it came and how easily it came. There was a real underplay in how the case resolves itself. And I think that was always what I found most surprising about those two films, right? It just sort of kind of ends lah, right? The case ends. They solve the case, it ends, they move on. Whereas here, there's a real sort of trying to drag out the moment. The movie should have ended at least 20 minutes before it does. That last 15 minutes, because for some reason we have to see Eddie Murphy and his daughter have a chat at a diner, completely pointless. None of it is important.
I dozed off at that point.
I was fast forwarding. I just kept jumping forward because I didn't care. Literally did not give a shit about the daughter. There were moments where the daughter comes on screen and I forgot it was the daughter because she has so little play in this movie.
For me, the best part of the movie was the opening sequence, which felt the most Beverly Hills Cop-ish.
Yeah, but even then, Eddie Murphy doesn't look like he's having any fun.
The structure of the opening sequence I felt was very well done, with the idea of stealing a snowplow and just totaling Detroit is a very Axel Foley thing and a great way to start the movie. But throughout the movie, the biggest problem is that Eddie Murphy doesn't look like he's having a good time.
As I was watching this, I kept asking myself, does Eddie Murphy not want to do this movie? Because it really feels like he didn't want to do this movie. He barely smiled throughout the thing. He wasn't having any fun. Okay, look, so for example, in the first Beverly Hills, when Eddie Murphy's character, Axel Foley, finally shows up at Beverly Hills, he's walking down the street and he sees two white guys dressed as Michael Jackson in Thriller, right? The red jacket and the red pants. And I swear to God, for a split second, it looks as if the director sprung that on him. Like Eddie Murphy was almost going to look at the camera and go, are you seeing this? This is ridiculous. The way he breaks down in laughter at these ridiculous white people trying to dress fashionably. There is none of that here. In Beverly Hills Cop 4, there's none of that Axel Foley joy. Even when Axel Foley was being beaten up in the second movie, there was still the smart-ass cracking Axel. Here, there isn't. There's none of that.
When you watch the first and the second movie, there is a running gag throughout both movies where Axel kind of cons his way into accommodation in Beverly Hills. And it's a running gag because obviously he's had an unsavory past before he became a cop. That's a running gag throughout those movies as well. In this one, there is a scene that kind of plays out that way or starts to play out that way. And then he stops himself and he goes, nah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a mistake because it was the same problem that some people had with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, where they said, oh, I don't want to see my heroes grow old. But what I didn't mind about Dial of Destiny is Harrison Ford may be old, but he was still doing Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford-y things. In this one, our hero is old and he's behaving like he's old. And I don't think I want to see that version of Axel Foley because that's not who Axel Foley is. Even in the third movie, when he is still causing chaos, he's still unapologetic about it because he gets the job done. He knows he's great at his job. His chief may have gotten shot at the beginning of the film and he feels guilty about it. But at the same time, his last words, the chief's last words to him were, Axel, are you on a coffee break? Go get that son of a bitch. They know that this is what Axel Foley does. And that was missing in this movie.
Whereas in this movie, even in that opening sequence where he is tracking down a criminal when he's been actively told by his chief to not track down that criminal. He looks reluctant doing it. The character is telling me that, oh, he's going over the chief's head because he wants to get the job done. But Eddie Murphy's face is saying, I'd rather just sit here and watch this hockey game. It's not that I don't want to see Axel Foley go old. I don't think this is how Axel Foley will age. This is a different version than I saw in the first 3 films. That is the most disappointing, depressing thing.
I don't think this is the way the character would have grown up. And so for me, that was the biggest disappointment. And I just, rewatching those 30, 40-year-old movies, I was still laughing out loud.
Absolutely.
I think there were moments when I cracked a smile at this one, but that was purely because of nostalgia more than anything else. And it wasn't because of what was actually happening on screen.
Well, I don't know if I did. I wasn't paying attention to my own reaction.
Which is exactly what Netflix wants from you.
I don't know, man. I'm disappointed. I am absolutely disappointed. You said Kevin Bacon was criminally underused. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt was criminally underused.
I agree. He was.
He was underused in this because he was charming enough. He had enough of a backstory for me to want to care, for me to want to see him be a partner, right? Like, to me, that would have been interesting. Had Axel Foley showed up in Beverly Hills, and unlike the first 2, he actually has to have a partner to actually work this case out. Because, hello, Joseph Gordon-Levitt was also suspended. So they're both working outside the law, right? You could have done that easily, but no. You kept them apart for way too long. And even when you put them together, you didn't do anything about it.
We think you should skip this one. It is incredibly disappointing and not particularly funny. It's not the worst movie ever made, but that's not saying very much. If you are a Beverly Hills Cop fan, this one is just very, very disappointing, but utterly par for the course when it comes to these Netflix reboots, remakes, and requels. Let us know what you think if you check it out. You know how to reach out, Goggler MY, at all of our social media feeds. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline, 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.